Crichton for the lovely introduction, and thank you all for coming out this evening. I'm very honoured to have been made a professor here at UHI, and I'd like to start by thanking all my colleagues past and present for the support that I've had along the way, because in the work I do, I can't do it alone. So I've been carried along the way by a number of people. It's a really tough gig here tonight, actually. I've been asked to talk about my career journey and what I'm passionate about, but I didn't really think you wanted to hear about cake and ice cream. So I thought what I'd do is start and outline how a sports-mad kid from Wellington in New Zealand. No, nothing is working. Nothing is working. Oh, it's recording, It was working before. I can always talk about slides.
So would you like to talk about New Zealand and the rugby?
Yeah, actually. Scots people who are here. No. Just as it was getting difficult. I played cricket for 10 years. I leave rugby out of it then. It's always good to share the winning around. But anyway, I thought I'd start with a journey about talking again about how the sports-mad kid from Wellington in New Zealand ended up in a department of nursing and midwifery in the Highlands of Scotland. And at the same time, talk about my research journey. So moving is simple. It's something that we can all do. We all spend the first year or so of our life learning how to walk. That's me. And the person sitting on me is my sister. Blame her for my bad back. And we spend that first year learning how to walk and move. And then we spend pretty well the rest of our lives being told to sit still. And, you go to school and you have to sit down and sit still. But we haven't, as humans, we have an innate need to move. Our biological heritage is one of requiring movement to survive. We were hunters and gatherers, but through first agriculture, then industrialization, and now technology, we are increasingly having physical activity engineered out of our lives, but we still have the genes of a hunter and gatherer. So there's something about moving that is important and innate and critical to us actually as animals. And why we've lost it is driven by social and physical environments that drive us towards doing what you're doing now, sitting down. So all of that has created a public health need around the promotion of physical activity to try and counter the negative impacts of low activity and the rising levels of non-communicable diseases such as type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and other things. But moving more has not always been my interest. It was performance enhancement. I was focused on how to train the mind and the body to optimize sporting performance. And that was my interest, and that's where I started out. And growing up in Wellington, this is another view of the beautiful harbour there, I was spent most of my childhood doing pretty well any sport that you can imagine. And I was inspired by my father. He was a life member of New Zealand Surf Lifesaving. He patrolled beaches from a very young age. He saved lives. He competed in lifesaving, and he was still judging on the beach in his late 70s, still judging surf lifesaving competitions. So I was inspired by him, but I was also at a high school that had amazing PE teachers, particularly Sue Murray, and she inspired me to carry on with my sporting career, such as it was, and my interest in sport. And that saw me trundling off to the beautiful University of Otago, And that's where I studied for a Bachelor of Physical Education with a major in sports science. Today that would be known as a sports science degree, but back then the only place in New Zealand you could do it was to go to a PE college and then major in sports science. When I was there, poor Greg actually, he's been kind of stuck by the video conference link, but Greg was a wonderful man. He was a supervisor for my undergraduate dissertation, and he opened at least one of my eyes, partially, a little bit, to the idea that sport wasn't all about competition and winning and going to the Olympics. And my dissertation was on motor control in young people with Down syndrome. And I began to realize through that work that there was much more to be gained from the act of moving itself rather than just competing and hopefully winning. Greg also introduced me to conferences. And he sent me and my dissertation to an international conference in Auckland, which was really nice of him for a really rookie researcher. It was a completely nerve-wracking experience, and it's probably only surpassed by what I'm doing right now. But anyway, he sent me there, but his biggest input to me was encouraging me to think about research as a career, and to, really think where I could take the skills that I had. And I owe him a lot for his encouragement and advice at that point in my life. Despite that one eye being ever so slightly opened, just ever so slightly opened, to the wider importance of movement, I still dreamt of the Olympics. As a coach or sports scientist now, because let's face it, this body was not designed to be an elite athlete. But, I'd finally come to the realizing that I wasn't going to be an elite athlete, but perhaps I could go to the Olympics as a sports scientist or in some sort of support role. So I continued to pursue performance enhancement, but now with a focus in on sports psychology. And there I went off then, took myself to Perth in Western Australia, to the University of Western Australia, where I spent an absolutely wonderful 5.5 years. I thoroughly recommend it as a place to live. And I completed both my Master's and PhD there under the supervision of Sandy Gordon. Sandy had 3 rules for PhD students. 1 was that you learned to play golf. 2, that you developed an appreciation of single malt whiskey. He was from Huntley. And 3rd, that you actually got around to doing your PhD and you finished it. So I actually did manage to accomplish all 3 of those things, although my golf has deteriorated rapidly over time. But, just to be aware, I do have a very good appreciation of single malt whiskey, if anyone would like to do that. Through golf, he also introduced me to the concept of walk and talk meetings before they were actually really a thing to do. And we had pretty well the ultimate in walk and talk meetings on the golf course. But he was a scratch golfer. I was not. So it was really good because he'd ask me a question on the tee. He'd go straight down the fairway. I'd go like this, have plenty of time to think of the answer. And between the green and the tee, we could carry on our conversation. And it was really good for giving time to formulate the answers. So those are my PhD students in the room. If you want to start taking up golf, we can go for these walk and talk meetings. But anyway, Sandy was a successful sports psychologist. He worked with a number of elite and professional teams. And from him, I started to develop my skills in working with athletes and enhancing performance. But I also started to try to understand why not everyone enjoyed sport and physical activity in the same way that I did. And I was increasingly aware that I was in a minority. It wasn't the non-sporty or non-active people who were weird. It was me and my friends because we were active. And the majority of people aren't active, so we're the weird ones. And I started to wonder why it is that most people do not participate in sport and physical activity. And my initial forays into this looked at fun and enjoyment. what it was that made activity fun and enjoyable to people. And this, I think, notion of fun and enjoyment is a really important feature of movement that we have lost sight of as the promotion of physical activity has increasingly become linked and tied to health and health outcomes. We pay lip service to it a lot. We tell people to choose something that they enjoy, but I really do think that we could do more with this notion and really promote more around fun and enjoyment and movement for movement's sake. This will be good for you focus has not been effective. We've still got the same number of people who are inactive as we had when we started out with those sorts of messages. And I really think that going back and focusing in on enjoyment and fun and the role that it plays and the pleasure that people get from the act of movement is an important thing for us all to do. So there were two other big projects that I was involved in while I was at UWA. One was looking at physical activity in older people, and the other was the sweat study. And you'll notice I have quite a number of jazzy acronyms for projects on the way through. We spend a lot of time trying to work out how we could make a name. So SWEAT stands for Sedentary Woman Exercise Adherence Trial. That was our first foray into acronyms. Both of these projects were based around the stages of change model, which at that point was relatively new in physical activity research, and many of you will have come across it now in various forms in terms of being ready to change behaviour and the idea that there are stages around readiness to change. And it's basically a recognition that not all inactive people are the same. There are some subgroups in there. Some of them are more willing or have more interest in perhaps changing, and some of them have less, and others have absolutely no intention of even considering physical activity at all. Trying to get people to move through those stages requires different strategies at different times, and confidence or self-efficacy, the belief that you can actually do the activity is critical to all movement between those stages. In projects, in the physical activity in older adult study, that was very descriptive, but we took what we had learned about the model and put it into a big intervention, which became Project SWEAT. And we had 4 groups. Some were exercising at home, some were exercising at an exercise centre, and some had been asked to work at moderate levels of intensity, and others more vigorously. And what we found was that actually, if we get people to start off their exercise program in a centre, and then we move them into home-based, we get better retention and better compliance than if we start them off home-based and home-based the whole way. So there's something about starting in a centre and getting them intensity effects really symptomatic, because those who've been asked to exercise hard or vigorously tended to go at the low end of that range, and those who've been asked to exercise moderately tended to go at the high end of that range, and that meant they were basically exercising the same. So what you really from that is that if you give people a choice of intensity, they'll find one that works for them, and that's an important thing. You can't get away from the importance of people. If you don't think you can do something, you're never going to turn up and do it. So there's something really important in all of that. And I'll draw your attention to the second point. It ain't easy. It's really, really hard to change people's behaviour. And it's really hard to get people to change physical activity, which is great for me because it keeps me in a job. If it was easy, then I might have been able to retire by now, but it wasn't possible. So there's some takeaways from that early work. At the age of 30, I thought that I really should get a job. I hadn't had a job at that point. I played a few turns as a PT in a gym. So I applied for a job at the University of Queensland and was appointed as a lecturer in sport and exercise psychology. And I spent a few years there. My main role at the University of Queensland was teaching.
If someone's available.
My teaching skills. My appointment was a joint appointment in the School of Human Movement Studies and the School of Psychology. We had 1,200 undergraduates in first year psychology. And so we had to teach 1,200. We did the same lecture 3 times to 400 students. We also managed to organise ourselves as a team to provide them with a 1-hour small group seminar every 2 weeks. So there's something about managing large numbers. We did try one year. We thought, well, doing the same lecture 3 times is pretty boring. For the lecturer, that is. It's probably pretty boring for the students, but they don't know that. So we got booked out the 3 big lecture theatres in Queensland, and we put 400 into each room, and we VC'd into the other 2. But what we discovered is that first-year undergraduate psychology students, I'm looking at you, Tash, cannot be trusted in a lecture theatre without an adult. And it was absolute mayhem. So we then had to put 2 adults in the other room, which of course was, not no better than doing the same lecture 3 times. So had some experience with trying to manage large numbers of first years. One of my other roles there was also in an MSc in sport and exercise psychology, where we were training sports psychologists to work with athletes at academies of sport, at the Australian Institute of Sport, and various other elite athletes. And I worked within that program. I supported the students learning as an applied sports psychologist, and I continued my own applied sports psychology work, working with elite athletes. So most of my time in Queensland was taken up with getting to grips with teaching, which I think anyone who's had an academic role knows that those first few years when you go into a teaching role, it's kind of all-consuming. But at the same time, there was in the media and in the community more broadly increasing talk about obesity and the consequences of this to people, the health service and the economy. And there was increasing talk about the problem of inactivity and how it might contribute to obesity. I was also at that time, it was the lead up to the Sydney Olympics. So this was in the late 1990s, in the lead up to Sydney Olympics, and millions and millions of dollars were being poured into the budget to support the elite athletes who might make it to Sydney and might go on the podium. So you had this real tension going on in Australia at the time amongst the people I was working with, in that we had all of this money going into elite sport. Most of us had come out of elite sport and had an interest in it, so we thought, this is great, we're going to get some medals. But we're also going, hey, you've got this really massive public health problem bubble starting to appear on the horizon that we have to do something about. And there was less than 4% of the budget for sport and physical activity going into that public health end of it. The rest was going to the very small, less than 1% who might go to Sydney. And this caused me a little bit of a disenchantment, I guess, with the imbalance that there was. We had masses of people and a huge public health problem, yet the money was going in the wrong direction. And it seemed rather lopsided to me, and it was at that point that I decided that really my focus wasn't going to be on applied sports psychology anymore. It was going to move to this perspective of trying to help and get more people more active. And the few takeaways from that is the dollars or pounds, I don't know which currency to put up there, are needed. We can't do this on the cheap. We need money to support changes to physical environments, to make them more appealing to physical activity, but we also need the money to support the programs and maintaining those programs to keep people involved in physical activity. I also think there is a real need to stress the importance of policy. And this isn't just policy around physical activity, it's policy around health, policy around transport, policy around the development of communities, building new housing estates, so that they can all support physical activity. And I will, some of you were joking about rugby and all the rest of it. I will actually give Scotland a shout out here. You have been at the forefront of policy in physical activity globally. One of the first countries in the world to have a national physical activity policy, and the first in the world to have an implementation plan alongside that policy that says, well, how are we going to take these lovely words on the page and turn them into action? So well done, Scotland. Give yourself a clap. There we go. So anyway, that's my journey from how I got from a competition-mad, competitive sports kid into someone entirely focused on getting more people more active, and some of the obligatory NAF photos that we have to put in these things. So I next found myself at Loughborough in what was then the real mouthful of the Department of PE, Physical Education, Sports Science and Recreation Management. And after various iterations in my time there, we came up with a shorter name, the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences. Here I was really lucky to work alongside Professor Stuart Biddle in the broad area of the psychology of physical activity, developing an understanding of physical activity behavior change. And I continue to do some work with Stuart, and he also continues to have a big influence on my career and the work that I do. While I was there, we started to look at the notion of sedentary behavior. And this was on the back of a very smart PhD student I had, Simon Marshall, and he really introduced us to this idea that, well, we're not being very successful at getting people to do moderate to vigorous physical activity. Is there something about, what's appealing about what you're all doing now? This sitting stuff, all of this behavior that people are doing, and perhaps if we understood what attracted people to sitting, we might find another routine to getting people to move more. And Simon was really the first person I spoke to that came up with this idea, and it formed quite a large part of his PhD. And we did Project Still, another one of our great Anyway, Project Still for sedentary teenagers in active lifestyles. And this was a big study of, cross-sectional study of over 2,000 adolescents in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And we were exploring how they spent their time. And from within that, we were particularly interested in what they did when they weren't active. And adolescents found many, many different ways to be sedentary. It wasn't all just TV. I mean, this was in the days before every other person or everybody had a smartphone and a computer. But screens were starting to come into it. But it wasn't just about television. We also found that physical activity wasn't strongly associated with TV. And you often hear in the media, oh, they're watching TV, therefore they're not being active. But there's not actually a very strong correlation between those two behaviors. They seem to be able to coexist. And some of that is maybe they happen at different times of the day. Maybe not now. We're talking historically now. Now the screens and everything that has changed. TV viewing, also, we were looking at it, was largely uncorrelated with body fatness in youth. And you hear that a lot as well. And it's too simplistic when we start looking at sedentary behavior to blame it purely on screens. There's something else going. Aside from TV viewing and screen, they found 17 other ways to be sedentary. So, there's lots of different ways they can be sedentary. And there are differences between boys and girls in the sorts of behaviors that they do. And this work, along with a lot of other work we did around sedentary behavior, made a big contribution in the physical activity guidelines that came out in 2011. They've recently been updated, but in 2011, the new physical activity guidelines for the first time ever contained a recommendation around sedentary behavior. So there was the usual recommendation about, do 150 minutes of moderate and vigorous physical activity per week, do some strength training a couple of times a week, and minimize the length of times particularly in long bouts. So that work led directly into that as well. At the same time, we did a number of behaviour change trials of physical activity and sedentary behaviour. And I'm going to talk now about two approaches that we've used in behaviour change. One's around structured education, and then the other one will get into looking at schools. So structured education programs are usually used with clinical populations. They're a way of encouraging self-management and encouraging people to participate in an active way in their learning about their medical condition, associated risk behaviours, those sorts of things. It's usually done through an educational workshop. I've got the posh term here, non-didactic, which basically means it's not standing, talking next to you and telling you things. It's about working in an interactive way with the group of people in front of you to enhance group learning and individual learning as well. It's a widely advocated approach. NICE support it, the National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence advocate for it. And it's based on a very structured, written curriculum and underpinned by a whole bunch of learning and health behaviour theories. So to give you a sense of what a structured education workshop might look like, this is one from Project Cedric. Again, you'll turn up, lots of really good acronyms. So what would happen in a typical workshop is we spend some time in three sections: the patient story, professional story, and then in this case, for this one, about walking. We were trying to promote walking. The population here were adults with peripheral arterial disease, so they had an arterial blockage in their lower leg in this case, and they got something called claudication or intermittent claudication. So when they walk, they get severe cramp-like pain in their leg. It's not cramp, but they stop and it goes away, and then they can walk again. So obviously walking is quite painful for them, but actually walking is something that is really important for them in the management of their condition. So they come into a room. You've typically got six or eight of them there. They spend some time telling us about themselves. So they tell us their story, their thoughts about their condition, their diagnosis, symptoms, causes, all this. We then move on to a section around professional story, and here we are covering what, in this case, peripheral arterial disease is, what is intermittent claudication, what is this pain they're experiencing, causes of it, potential complications, and risk factors. And all of that is done not by us telling you stuff. We use games, we use activities, we use discussions to draw that out of the people who are participating, and then using those games to correct some of the sometimes interesting views they have about the causes of their disease. So we never tell them they're wrong. We just build that on and build on. And then finally we spend the last half actually going through, in this case, walking. So we look at why walking might benefit them, what the guidelines are, why the mechanisms behind why it might improve their claudication. We talk about time and stress, things like that, way and reduce the goals. And they leave. Everybody leaves with their own individual goal around physical activity. It's not one I've imposed upon them. It's one that they themselves have worked through this session, so people will have different goals. And then a couple of weeks later, we will follow it up with phone call. So we've done three of these. We've done talking out. I don't quite remember what they are. The pre-diabetes risk education and physical activity recommendation and encouragement study. Cedric, structured education and rehabilitation in intermittent claudication. And Stand, sedentary time and diabetes. That one's really quite boring. So we've done three of these with different groups. The first two, Prepare and Cedric, were aimed at increasing walking. In the first one, in those adults with impaired glucose tolerance, so they were not yet type 2 diabetic, but they were heading in that direction. Cedric was, as I've already said, adults with peripheral arterial disease. Stand was different. We were trying to decrease sitting and using the structured education approach, decrease sitting. And the target group there were young adults at high risk of type 2 diabetes. These were the young adults. It came off a database that we had in Leicester that they had identified them as being high risk of diabetes on the basis of family history, obesity, blood glucose levels, and things like that. So they were at high risk. They all got a structured education intervention. Prepare was the first one we did. We had two groups there. One just got structured ed, so sort of program that I explained to you before. The second group got that, plus they were given a pedometer, so a step counter to monitor the steps. Cedric, we used the pedometer model as well, and then because we thought that self-monitoring was important, we used a funny device to monitor sitting in Project Stand. The comparison group in all of these trials were pretty well prepared. They just carried on as they were. And lo and behold, physical activity, structured education was really good. We were successful in increasing daily steps and walking capacity in those two groups. But actually something went wrong with the sitting one. Saw no change. And we're kind of looking what we knew from these previous two studies that we had done, that structured education was effective, and other people were doing other programs using this approach. Why might it not have worked? So I'm going to ask you guys to reflect on it. So stand up and discuss with you guys. Why did you all sit down when you came in? And why did you remain seated? Or you can sit down again. I really don't mind.
Can we dance?
There's a huge social norm going on here. Congratulations to all of those of you who are brave enough to remain standing. You have identified one of the main reasons why changing sitting is difficult. Social norms. You are constrained. When you come in here, it is socially acceptable to sit, and it is generally viewed that you're slightly rude if you stand for the person giving a lecture. You're not. Okay? I don't mind at all. Feel free. But social norms really constrain our behaviour. The other thing is the physical environment. You've got chairs. Why not use them? And that is what people do. And we found that that was a really big underpinning of change when we try and change sitting behaviour, not just in Project Stand, but also in other interventions. We have to do more, far more, at the environmental level, both social and physical, if we're going to change sitting behaviour. There are a couple of other reasons why Project Stand might not have worked. One was personal relevance. These were young adults at high risk of type 2 diabetes. They were asymptomatic. Many of them didn't see this as a problem, even though we sat them down and showed them their risk factors, and we had nice little traffic light things, and they were all up in the red zone of risk. They didn't see it as being relevant to them. Many of them said to us when we interviewed them afterwards, well, I didn't feel anything. My aunt's got diabetes, my granny's got diabetes, and I've lived to 106. They're absolutely fine. Why is diabetes such a bad thing? So they didn't see that what they were at risk at was actually relevant to them, or that it was actually going to be particularly bad for them. They also didn't buy into the notion that sitting was bad for their health, and that sitting somehow was affecting what they did, or their health outcomes. So there's something different we need to do with sitting. Also, as I mentioned before, the self-monitoring device, the Groove, was a little bit strange. There weren't many devices available when we started this project for monitoring sedentary behaviour. Now, you know, your Fitbits and all sorts of things can be made to vibrate and warn you when you've been sitting for too long. Back when we started this, they weren't there. We used the only one that was available on the market, the Groove. The Groove was not at all groovy. It was unreliable. It broke down. It was cumbersome to use. And they stopped using it. So we lost one of the key components in behaviour change, which was feedback. And we think that that also contributed to some of the problems that we had. So if we're looking again here, a few takeaways from these projects in structured education. It's really important that you work with the people to address knowledge gaps and uncertainty around the disease process, and getting people to buy in and have a shared understanding of the role that physical activity and sedentary behaviour may play in disease management. I think we're very good at telling people why, and we assume that they take that on board and they make that relevant to themselves. My experience is that they don't, and we need to do more than just simply tell them, hey, this is why it's good for you, these are the outcomes that you might see. As always, self-monitoring, feedback, and goal setting. We need to somehow build that in without making it terribly boring and onerous on them. Social expectations. We've got to somehow deal with those and changing social norms. We've done some work recently in work sites about actually putting physical activity into the working day. The social norm around what constitutes looking like you're working is incredible. If you're not at your desk, you can't possibly be working. This is the feedback that we're getting from people. And that's all around a culture and a belief about what it means to be working and to be at work. So these things have a role to play. And so we need to address those cues that drive habit before we can make other changes. So the other area where I've done quite a number of interventions has been in schools. And under the banner of Great Fun to Run, we had 3 trials went on, 2 in primary schools and 1 in secondary school. And this was working with teachers. We developed a whole series of teaching materials, which, again, to date, the initial version of this was delivered on a DVD. The second version of it was delivered to the interweb. And we had some teaching materials. We worked with the teachers to develop those so that they would fit within the curriculum. And we had cross-curricular activities, so it wasn't all just taught as part of PE and health. We had activities in maths and in geography and social science and things like that. So it was constantly coming back to this message around healthy lifestyles. There were highlight events, so they trained, for want of a better expression, for highlight events, fun run, fun walk. There was a dance event that they could work towards as well. We set activity challenges, particularly over holidays. Holidays are a really bad time for physical activity interventions in schools. They really muck with your trials. The kids suddenly disappear for like 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever, and everything goes out the window. They forget everything, and you start again when they came back. So we would set like step count challenges or some other activity challenge for them to do during the holidays. There were parent newsletters home to the parents, and some homework tasks as well, which were designed to actually be done collaboratively with the parents and the child. In the primary school, this approach worked. We increased physical activity by about 10 minutes a day. That doesn't seem like a lot, but actually over the population is quite a significant change and is comparable to the best of interventions that have been done around the world in schools. We did adapt it for secondary schools. We didn't just try and do the same thing in secondary schools. We recognise that secondary schools are a different environment, they have a different structure. So we made adaptations, we worked with the teachers to do that, but it really flopped in secondary schools. And there's something different that we need to do in secondary schools. There's something about the changing needs of adolescents, even though we tried to factor them in. Adolescents also don't like wearing the monitoring devices. They are seriously uncool. so they don't wear the accelerometers, which doesn't help your numbers. And the different timetable and teaching setup and things like that, along with the developmental changes in adolescence, really meant that somewhere along the line, Great Fun to Run broke down in that transition. We did another study. It's just finished, actually. This was a big trial using the Youth Sport Trust Girls Active initiative. And Girls Active is a really large program. It provides a support framework into secondary schools to encourage them to review their physical education, sport, and physical activity provision for girls with respect to girls. And there's a whole bunch of things in the program. It's a massive program. The teachers choose from a smorgasbord as to what they're going to try and do in their school. There are 3 things they have to do, though. One is attend some training. The second one is to put together some peer support leader groups. And they're not taking asking for the kids who are active. They want the peer leaders, the kids who have status and kudos in that group, who, if they give a message, it has more chance of being taken on board. So they had to do that, and they also had to do a mission analysis which they hated, where they had to plan out what they were going to do over the year. And then there were a large number of resources and other supports that were available to them to try and facilitate them. It was really well received by the teachers and pupils. They loved it, but it made no difference to the physical activity behaviour. And it's quite disappointing after 18 months, but you know. And we did a really large study following up on it to try and work out what had gone on. This is a nationally funded project. It's still being rolled out. Some of the reasons that emerge is that the flexibility, actually giving the teachers valued the autonomy and being able to have the choice, but there was so much flexibility in the program, they were almost paralyzed. You know, they said we needed more key dates, we needed more direction, and perhaps a smaller number of choices. So actually the flexibility, we thought we were doing them a favour, but we had too much there and it created uncertainty. What the schools did a lot of was focus on support activities. So in the year that we were in the schools doing the evaluation, they did a lot with the young people about asking them what they were interested in and how they would like the youth to change and things like that. It didn't actually provide any new physical activity opportunities. And while it's really important to understand and hear the pupil's voice, if you don't actually then do anything new with that, of course we're not going to change their behaviour. So there was something there. The peer leaders, that was quite a challenging role for them, and they needed to have more structure and training along that. And then Ofsted would turn up, and things would go on the back burner. One school suddenly got told they had to merge with the school down the road, so that Girls Active wasn't very high on their list as they tried to merge 2 new schools. So school level things get in the way as well. So a few takeaways from there. We do need to support teachers. Just giving them autonomy is important, but they need support alongside that. Obvious things to make it fit within the curriculum. They're busy people. They're doing lots. You don't want to add to their workload, so it has to be easy and time efficient. Great Fun to Run was more of a bottom-up approach as well. It really worked from the schools in coming up. I think there's a lot to be learned from that. And if you look at things like the Daily Mile, which was very much a bottom-up initiative in schools, there's a lot to be gained from allowing things to emerge from the context in which you're putting them in. So somewhere along the line while I was doing all of that, I did actually migrate to the University of Stirling, and initially in the School of Sports Science, but I was living in Inverness, and after a year or two, it was actually Jill sent me an email and said, do you want to make your life simpler and apply for a job in Inverness? So I did, wondering how I would fit into a department of nursing. But I did apply, and they accepted me. And that's how I come to be here in the Highland campus. And I've been made very welcome, despite my lack of nursing credentials and my almost pathological fear of hospitals. I've been made very, very welcome here, and it's been a great time for me. But while at Stirling, mostly I was doing the projects that we've talked about. Everything sort of moves with you and blends as you move around. But I did start working with Gemma, who you see here, and this is really the work site work, and trying to get more movement into the working day. And that work is ongoing and developing. And as many of you know, 3 years ago, we transitioned to UHI, and that's really the end of my globe-trotting journey from the bottom of the southern hemisphere to almost as far north in the UK as you could go. While in the department, I've developed a theme within the undergraduate nursing curriculum focused on physical activity and health. And if I'm honest, I think this is the most important intervention that I will ever do. If new generations of nursing students can enter the workforce with physical activity on their agenda, and the beliefs and the skills to talk about physical activity with the people they work with when it's appropriate, and do that with knowledge and enthusiasm and belief, then I think I will have a much broader impact across the board, and that will have an impact on the behaviour of the people who need physical activity the most. So to me, I think the work I'm doing now in the undergraduate curriculum, although untested and unresearched, is probably the biggest and most important intervention in terms of physical activity promotion that I will do. And I want to leave you just with a final message around physical activity. It's enjoy and have fun. And in the recently published physical activity guidelines for the UK, any activity is better than none, and more is better still. And a final thank you to all the research teams I have worked with throughout the years, to my PhD students past and present, because they often do most of the work and we get to take the credit, and to all the funders across the years who have helped. And finally, of course, to these two wonderful creatures for the support that they give me.
Journey you've taken us on, Trish, but you're not moving off from here just yet, so you can't escape just for the minute. Just for those who don't know me, I'm Michael Rayner. I'm the Dean of Research under the Graduate School here at UHI, and I'm very pleased that hopefully there's some people on VC as well to give you a few minutes to interrogate Trish on what she's presented to us, and be nice. Ask some nice questions. Floor's open, please.
I was going to ask one, but I've changed my mind. I want to ask this one. I really like the fact that you were telling us about the negative results. So you see that so much in research. So my question is, what did you learn more from? The positive results that you got out of your trials, or the negative results?
As with most things, it's the negative results. We always learn more from the errors or mistakes or things that don't work. If you look back, going back to the rugby, I'm going to bring it up again. The All Blacks will learn far more from their loss the other week than they do when they win every week. And I think that is true in research, that when things don't work, if we take the time to try and unpack why, then we can move forward with it. And often in research, we don't do enough of that. Historically, particularly in behaviour change interventions, we've only ever reported the result. We've not tried to unpack either why it worked or why it didn't work. And I think that's really important.
Is that because journals are restricting you doing that, and is that changing now? You know, the journals previously only want to hear about positive results, and are they now being more receptive to negative ones?
Good question. Don't really know the answer to that. I think historically we haven't done a lot of that, what I would call process evaluation, which is the stuff where you go and try and unpack why things worked and why they didn't work. We were funded to do the intervention. You were funded to see whether it was effective or not. And that tended to be what you reported. There are still quite a number of negative interventions published, but there is probably a publication bias. I know we had more trouble publishing stands than we did either of the other two. And people would say things, well, what are you really telling us? And we go, well, actually, we learn a lot because we weren't effective.
Question, to DC, just quickly, if there's anybody on DC that wants to ask a question, just come in or I'll come back into the room. No?
I was interested you were highlighting the sort of fun and enjoyment aspect of sport, but I wonder, certainly for people that are very performance orientated, I mean, I rarely enjoy the physical activity side of it, you know, and there are other motivations at play there than the actual activity of cycling or running and so on. And you know, I'm wondering whether, you know, the interaction with people who tend to be in sports training disciplines or careers are of that background, so that they've got different motivations for their sport rather than the actual subject that you're trying to motivate to have it a fun and enjoyable experience.
Yeah, I think fun and enjoyment is actually quite a complex thing to unpack, and it's not just about sort of kick and giggle. When we start looking at unpacking what makes people say it's enjoyable, it's about showing competence. There is an element of competition for some people that isn't enjoyable, and even when you talk to elite athletes, they won't talk about, you know, it's that chance to display competence and achievement and ability. There is also a social side, and even elite athletes will talk about that, the social side and the unity they feel within a team, and it crosses over also into the public domain. So I think fun and enjoyment is a much deeper concept than just, that's kind of fun, I kind of enjoy it, you know, it's a bit of a giggle and we'll have a good time. So there's lots of components that go into making it, and it can be applied equally, and different things will work for different people and will motivate them and attract them in different ways. Yeah.
And have you used in your studies, certainly around the individual ones where I guess people got pedometers or so on and they're looking for individual gains, but have you used, I know it's often you get team challenges and so on to do walking, and which team's walking them, you know, there's a bit of competition element in there as well.
There is the Step Count Challenge, which is run every autumn by Paths for All. We've taken the data from the last 4 years and looked at you know, whether that actually results in a change in steps across the 8 weeks, which it does. But that has built into it that sense of team. You enter Step Count Challenges in team of 5, and it is about the support you get from your teammates to try and do more steps. But also, every week there's a published who's the top team and stuff, and so there's an element of competition, and that turns some people off, but they can just ignore that bit of it. But for other people, they just get right into that and go, oh, come on, you know, we can't be the third worst team. You know, we've got to be something better than that. So you can use it in many ways.
You mentioned the importance of bottom-up activities such as the Daily Mile, and perhaps Parkrun and Job Scotland are in that category as well. What is it that's made those so successful, and what can you learn from those?
I think if the two quite different things. The Daily Mile was started in a school in Stirling. We did one of the first evaluations of a small-scale evaluation. It's very simple. A head teacher noticed that there was a problem in the school around physical activity, well, actually around weight. And then someone mentioned to them that it was these kids were inactive, they were unfit, and so they decided, they talked to the kids in their class, and they decided amongst themselves, and it's the teacher and this class, that they would go out every day and they would try and run a mile. And then after a few weeks, they talked about it and they thought, oh, look, we feel better about this. This is good. And it spread through that school, and then it sort of spread economically to all these other schools. I think, and because it's simple, it's neither a day. It's neither a daily or a mile. Because if you take a bunch of 30 kids out and ask them to do a mile, some will do it in 10 minutes. Some will do it in an hour. And you can't have that. So it's actually 15 minutes of activity. And because of other things that go on in schools, it's not daily. But every other day for 15 minutes isn't quite as catchy as daily mile. It is known as a daily mile. A couple of concerns around the daily mile. It's compulsory. If your teacher says you're going outside to do it, you have to go outside and do it. And there's a whole literature around motivation and compulsion, and to what extent then the long term that will actually lead to long-term behaviour change. I'm not sure. I think it's a good initiative. It's doing something, and it also has nothing else wrapped around it. They just take them out and do physical activity. So at one level, it's developing a norm about having activity in the day, but at another level, with this element of compulsion in it, maybe there's something that's not quite right.
My question kind of links to that, actually. It's a bit about motivation. So one of your key messages seems to be to make physical activity fun.
Yep.
And yet I kind of see it being medicalised quite a bit. So, we want to get GPs and other healthcare professionals to almost see physical activity as an intervention. And therefore, does it become more of a stick than a carrot? Or is there a risk to that, do you think?
I think there is a risk. I think GPs and other health professionals have a role in the encouragement around physical activity, and definitely should be promoting it at one level, but constantly linking it into a health outcome, I think, is a risk. And we need to do more about how do we get our messaging right, where we can perhaps use some of the health events as triggers, but don't continually medicalise physical activity and make it a medication, because it is about movement and this thing that we can inherently do and enjoy. So there's a tension there to be played where, yes, we definitely want the medical professionals involved in the game, but how we go about talking it. And I'm looking at Katie at the back. The GP in the room. Yeah. Colin.
I've been involved in coaching and teaching in the Highlands for 57 years.
Yeah, and you taught Emma. She's just in the front.
And when I first came up, every primary school had a specialist who coached even nursery, from primary 1 to primary 7. Now there's only about 4 PE teachers in Inverness-shire who go around and can pick their schools to go into and can pick the days they go into. And it's left to the rest of the teachers to go on a small training course to take the children. In my opinion, it's not just in the Highlands, it's in Scotland. I just don't understand why every PE teacher now is trained, goes into secondary schools. Some secondary schools can provide some things to go into primary, but not all of them. In Inverness, there's 2 secondary schools that don't have any primary provision. Teachers going to primary. So lots of primary without. And I'm still coaching, and I consider now, what do you think? Personal bests are not, I know it takes a lot of time to test and things like that, but my theory is, especially for the young kids, and I take kids from 3.5 years of age, I think that we should be concentrating. I know it takes time consuming, but on PBs and the various things, it can be counted.
I think what you're talking about, Colin, there, some really good points about how we bring our children up to be physically literate and understanding movement and being able to move in a literate and competent way. I think there's also I lost my thread there for a minute, because it was quite a long question.
I've been here a long time.
when I first moved to Inverness and my children came to primary school physical education, or your physical activity things at the leisure centre, every person I met knew you because you'd either taught them or taught their kids. So, that's a fantastic thing. But I think there is something in schools about how we provide to develop physically literate children and develop those. It's a challenge, and you're right, it's not just in Scotland. And the primary school teachers are generalists, and they are expected to teach everything from art to PE and everything in between. And part of actually Great Fun to Run was about trying to address that by developing curriculum materials that were easy for generalist primary school teachers to use and apply. One of the difficulties we have in schools is there's a new initiative every other week. Youth Sport Trust have developed, I've lost track of the number of initiatives they've developed, and they're not the only charity or organisation producing these things. And things get lost. So things that were successful kind of get dropped off because the next new cab on the rank is arrived and it's the one being funded. So all of a sudden we've got to do that one. So there's an issue around that and maintaining the successful ones and moving out those that aren't.
Yeah, I think I know time's getting on, so I apologise. We'll have to call a halt to the questions just there, but there will be a chance, I think, afterwards for some teas and coffees and maybe to ask some more questions at that point. But I really do want to thank you, Trish, for what has been a truly fascinating talk that you've given to us. And if I can characterise it in a few ways, it all seems to me to be about journeys of one sort or another. You've taken us from walks and talks in New Zealand, along a golf course to UHI, the land of the amber nectar, of course, which we now understand you quite like. We've been from teaching to research, and now what you're doing is both, which you seem to be enjoying and thriving on quite well. We're certainly enjoying it. You've talked about a journey from an interest in elite sport to then helping the general population. And so in one sense you've been on a journey from theory to practice to get people moving. And really get people moving from a sedentary lifestyle that so many of us, including me, are too familiar with, to active lifestyles and the promotion of the benefits all that brings with it. And you've also taken us from the land of protocols and social norms to breaking conventions, which is no bad thing for us all to do. In the process, you've told us to have fun and enjoy ourselves, and maybe a little bit of sweat along the way is no bad thing, just to make sure we're all active and healthy. It's been a fascinating, wonderful journey. You're a wonderful and terrific colleague and a great asset to UHI. We wish you many more years of success here, and I know that Ian Megson now is going to come up and you can relax a bit now. I welcome you formally into the professorial at the University of the Highlands and Islands.
Thank you, Michael. This is the point in the evening where traditionally the old duffer is wheeled out to dribble on for hours about the professoriate and to welcome you to it. You'll be glad to hear that that's going to happen. Not the old duffer bit, because clearly I'm here. So, but I'm not going to talk for hours, really primarily because we've heard from three individuals already about what you bring to this university and exactly why you have been awarded with this this title of professor, and we shouldn't belittle that. It's the pinnacle of your career in terms of promotions and titles. Hopefully it's not the pinnacle of your career and the end of your career, because we want you to work on here. And I think we've heard today, in my view, this area of research is absolutely vital. We talk about impact of research now. It's it's vital that our research has an impact on the population, on society, and this aspect is critical, in my view, to helping us to deal with some really challenging health issues. Not only obesity, there's loneliness, there's all sorts of things that come into this. And I think we have a star in the making here who can really drive impact for this university. So it only remains for me to welcome Trish to the professoriat, whatever that is. I hate to think what a collection of professors is really called, but I'm sure there'll be some suggestions from the team. So, welcome. My final duty is to remind everyone that there is tea and coffee outside. I think there are some nibbles to go with that, but Trish will tell you how many miles you're going to work off any of those treats.